Noon, the subcommittee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. Pursuant to Committee Rule 2E and House Rule 11, the chair announces that he may postpone roll call votes. Pursuant to notice, the Subcommittee on Energy meets to consider the following measures: H.R. 3597, Solar Energy Research and Development Act of 2019, H.R. 3607, Fossil Energy Research and Development Act of 2019, and H.R. 3609, Wind Energy Research and Development Act of 2019. Today we're marking up 3 bipartisan bills that will strengthen our country's research and development across a broad array of energy and ensure that we are improving our energy systems, our economy, and our climate. This subcommittee has held 2 hearings related to these bills, which brought together experts representing industry, our national labs, policy development institutions, and environmental advocates to discuss the R&D needs of solar, wind, and fossil energy technologies. We are fortunate to have many world-leading companies, labs, universities, researchers, and scientists right here in our own country working on and advancing and discovering energy technologies that can lower the cost for consumers and limit carbon emissions at the same time. These types of advancements can play a key role in mitigating climate change, producing breakthroughs, and providing good jobs. According to the EPA, the electricity, industrial, and transportation sectors account for roughly 79% of the United States' greenhouse gas emissions. Energy innovation is a critical step to reducing those emissions while also improving our economy and the affordability of energy. One of today's bills, which I am proud to be a co-sponsor of, the Fossil Energy Research and Development Act of 2019, embodies this dual opportunity. It supports carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies, and this will help us decarbonize fossil fuels and preserve American jobs in some of our most important industries. The federal government's research, development, and demonstration activities have already led us to significant advancements in these areas. As we've discussed before this subcommittee, the growth of natural gas production, which we have seen and are continuing to see in western Pennsylvania, and the surge in residential and utility scale photovoltaic solar panels across the country have a very direct link back to the Department of Energy Research and Development. We need to build on these achievements, and accordingly, Congress must provide the direction, tools, and resources that DOE needs to meet these challenges. Unfortunately, much of the existing law authorizing DOE's work in solar, wind, and fossil energy is insufficient and outdated. These bills will change that. They will reauthorize DOE's existing work and provide updated guidance and tools that reflect the immense changes each industry has experienced over the past 15 years. Specifically, H.R. 3597, the Solar Research and Development Act of 2019, reauthorized and expands research, development, and demonstration on a range of solar energy technologies, including photovoltaic and concentrating solar power systems. The bill authorizes research on emerging technologies and market mechanisms to improve solar energy's efficiency and affordability, like new materials that could allow solar panels to be integrated into windows and other types of infrastructure. H.R. 3607, the Fossil Energy Research and Development Act of 2019, reauthorizes and expands research, development, and demonstration of carbon capture technologies for power plants and industrial sources. It would also authorize R&D activities in carbon storage, carbon utilization, improvements in efficiency, and rare earth elements, launch new initiatives in carbon dioxide removal, waste gas utilization, and also help us prevent significant leaks of methane from natural gas infrastructure. Finally, H.R. 3609, Wind Energy Research and Development Act of 2019, reauthorizes and expands research, development, testing, and evaluation of wind energy technologies, including onshore and offshore turbines, as well as airborne technologies. The bill specifically authorizes research on technologies that can enable next-generation, very large-scale wind turbines and floating offshore wind farms. The energy industry is critical to our economy. Passing these bills will ensure that our nation leads in energy innovation, allows us to mitigate climate change, and continue creating American jobs. I look forward to advancing these important bills out of our subcommittee today, and I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Weber, to present his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to all. For the opportunity to speak on H.R. 3597, I thank you. It is the Solar Energy Research and Development Act of 2019, also H.R. 3609, the Wind Energy Research and Development Act of 2019, and H.R. 3607, the Fossil Energy Research and Development Act of 2019. On the Science Committee, as my friends on both sides of the aisle here can attest, we pride ourselves on our ability to do great bipartisan work to support the research and development activities that will grow our economy, strengthen our national security, protect our environment, and help maintain U.S. leadership in science and technology. That's why it's unfortunate that we cannot come to an agreement on this legislation today. The three bills we will consider this afternoon are focused on demonstrating energy technologies, many of which are already currently available in the commercial marketplace. And they propose unrealistic budget increases to a number of DOE-applied programs. If enacted, these bills could further limit federal investment available for truly innovative, early-stage research that industry cannot undertake. The Solar Energy Research and Development Act authorizes solar energy research conducted by the DOE's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, or EERE. EERE is the largest applied program at the DOE by far and received almost $2.4 billion in funding in 2019. This legislation before us today would authorize approximately $1.5 billion for this work, reaching a 33% total increase in funding from enacted levels by 2024. And while this legislation makes references to, quote, next generation, end quote, solar technologies, and does include authorizations for some critical basic research priorities that I support, like innovative energy storage and advanced computing capabilities, it focuses heavily on expanding the deployment of today's solar technologies. Similarly, the Wind Energy Research and Development Act authorizes wind energy research conducted under EERE and would provide over $570 million for this work. This amounts to a 37% increase from the enacted levels by 2024. And while this legislation addresses some shared priorities like basic research in material science and hybrid energy systems, its primary focus is on reducing, quote, market barriers, end quote, for existing wind technologies. I think I can safely say we all support the incredible growth we've seen in the wind and solar industries in the past decade. Texas leads the nation in wind energy. But American industry is already leading the way on deploying these wind energy technologies. And we won't discover the next game-changing technology by duplicating those efforts. Finally, the Fossil Energy Research and Development Act reauthorizes DOE's Fossil Energy Research and Development FER&D programs and brings total spending in this area to over $1 billion by fiscal year 2024, a 36% increase from enacted levels. And while I'm supportive of funding research to help us better capture, storage, and utilize carbon, this can't be our only goal when it comes to fossil energy technology. This bill's singular focus on emissions control technology ignores the reality of our nation's continued reliance on fossil fuel resources and their role in our clean energy future. Now, let me be clear. I'm supportive of DOE funding for innovative research that will lead to new solar, wind, and fossil energy technologies. But as stewards of taxpayers' resources, we must focus funding on projects that are truly cutting edge, like basic research in advanced computing, advanced manufacturing, and the development of new materials. The fact is, fundamental research often leads to improvements in all forms of energy technologies, and not just ones that get attention from members of Congress. With our national debt at $22 trillion and rising, we simply can't afford to increase spending for every program. So, instead of trying to pick and choose or just setting aspirational spending goals, let's take the common sense approach. Let's work together to invest in the basic research that we all support. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Now recognize the chair of the full committee to present her opening remarks.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman Lamb, for holding this markup to advance bipartisan legislation that focuses on several of our nation's most important energy resources: solar, wind, and fossil energy. We're in a moment of transformation in this nation. Both Democrats and Republicans recognize the importance of prioritizing a clean energy future for America. The research paths we set forth today, such as those laid out in these bills, will be essential to helping us achieve our climate change mitigation and adaptation goals while ensuring that every American has access to low-cost, reliable electricity. First, we have H.R. 3597, the Solar Research and Development Act of 2019, led by Congressman McAdams. This legislation lays out a thoughtful research agenda for solar energy, prioritizing technologies that are efficient, reliable, and affordable. This bill also supports a new solar technology manufacturing initiative that instructs the Department of Energy to develop and implement a plan for reestablishing a domestic solar energy manufacturing base. Next, we have H.R. 3607, the Fossil Energy Research and Development Act of 2019, led by Congressman Vesey, which I was very happy to co-sponsor along with my colleagues, Mr. Lamb, and the Environment Subcommittee Chairwoman Fletcher, and Congressman Swigert. We know how important it is to invest in research to address the environmental impacts of fossil fuels, and this legislation does exactly that. This bill sets forth a research agenda for important topics like carbon capture, storage and utilization, carbon renewal, and methane leak detection and mitigation. And by doing so, this bill establishes a strong foundation for our nation's research priorities on fossil energy. And lastly, we have H.R. 3609, the Wind Energy Research and Development Act of 2019, led by Congressman Tonko. This legislation directs the Department of Energy to focus on a robust wind energy research agenda that includes new materials and system designs that promote sustainability and ease of manufacturing. This bill also supports a robust research agenda for offshore wind, which has significant potential for leveraging untapped energy resources near our nation's coast. I thank my fellow members of Congress on both sides of the aisle who worked hard on these bills and for their leadership in advancing these important energy technologies. They are each strong examples of the kind of nonpartisan, constructive efforts that move us forward as a nation. I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. We will now consider H.R. 3597, the Solar Energy Research and Development Act of 2019. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 3597.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open to amendment at any point. I recognize myself briefly to comment on the bill. H.R. 3597, the Solar Energy Research and Development Act of 2019, reauthorizes the Department of Energy's Solar Energy Technology Office and provides it with additional guidance that reflects the immense growth and change in the solar energy industry and research arena over the past 10 years. This bipartisan bill is sponsored by my colleague, Mr. McAdams, and co-sponsored by Mr. Fortenberry. It is also endorsed by the Solar Energy Industries Association, which represents about 1,000 solar companies across the country, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and the Environmental Defense Fund. I now yield the remainder of my time to Mr. McAdams to speak on his bill.
Thank you, Chair Lamb and Ranking Member Weber and members of the Energy Subcommittee, Full Committee Chair Johnson, for this opening markup and a chance for me to speak on the Solar Energy Research and Development Act. My bill would reauthorize, as explained, the Department of Energy to pursue solar energy research, development, and project demonstrations. This includes developing solar technologies that expand the capacity and efficiency of solar energy. The bill focuses on the near term, the midterm and long-term targets, ensuring our commitment to America's leadership in the global energy economy and for the next generation of Americans. It also aids with developing solar as a reliable source of energy, lessening our dependence on foreign markets, and building a stronger and more secure grid. Solar innovation also continues to drive the cost of renewable energy lower, helping the environment and helping consumers. Utah's a national leader in solar development. We rank 10th in solar production in the country, and we are projected to produce 1,079 megawatts of solar energy in the next 5 years. The solar presence in my state of Utah is so strong, 320,000 homes are powered by solar energy. Even our soccer stadium, home of the Utah Royals and Real Salt Lake, also home of the another stadium, home of the Utah Jazz, and yet one of our Olympic facilities, the ice sheet Olympic Arena, is powered by solar. Additionally, solar investments have contributed $2.63 billion to our state's economy. And in my district alone, solar energy supports 40 companies, employs 6,000 Utahns, powers 14,000 homes, and produces 72 megawatts of electricity. So addressing the very serious threat of climate change is going to be difficult. However, it also presents us with an opportunity to create a renewable energy economy with zero emissions that will improve the cleanliness of the air we breathe and the water we drink. This bill combats climate change by creating jobs, securing our grid, and helps produce clean, reliable energy. I encourage my colleagues to vote yes on H.R. 3597. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
Does anyone else wish to be recognized? We will now proceed with the amendments in the order of the roster. The first amendment on the roster is offered by the chair, and the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 1, amendment to H.R. 3597.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself to briefly explain the amendment. This amendment makes technical and conforming changes made in consultation with the Department of Energy, expert stakeholders, and our minority committee staff. Additionally, based on feedback from minority staff, the amendment clarifies the effect of the funding allocations in the bill. Is there further discussion on the amendment? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Next amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from South Carolina. He is recognized to offer an amendment.
Thank you, Chairman Land. I'll briefly explain my amendment. It's pretty well what the title says. It limits funding to within existing appropriation levels. H.R. 3597, the Solar Energy Research and Development Act of 2019. My amendment adds a requirement that no additional funds are authorized to carry out this legislation. Instead, my amendment directs the Department of Energy to fund the work authorized under this legislation using amounts already appropriated to its offices of energy efficiency and renewable energy. What's worth noting is that DOE's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy is the largest applied energy program at the department by a long shot. In fiscal year 2019, EERE is funded at almost $2.4 billion, which is more than all of the R&D funding for DOE's applied offices in nuclear energy, fossil energy, electricity delivery, and cybersecurity and emergency response combined. DOE Solar Energy Research already receives over $246 million in annual funding from within this program. And this bill wants to increase that funding. Here in Congress, some of us are aware of the fact that we don't live in a world with unlimited resources, so we must work to prioritize the resources we have and make sure we are investing limited federal dollars in programs that benefit the American taxpayer. We can fund basic research in materials, computing, and advanced manufacturing that will lead to new solar energy technologies without increasing EERE spending. By making smart investments in the fundamental science that will drive innovation in solar energy technologies, we can help create a diverse, clean energy portfolio without more reckless spending. We don't need to drive up the national debt, which is already exceeding $23 trillion. And as a side note, if you had to count our national debt starting 1, 2, 3, and go up to the 23 trillion, it'll take you 682,000 years to finish it. I'll be 45 at that time. We can help create a diverse energy portfolio without reckless spending. We don't need to drive up the national debt and subsidize industry to support renewable industry technology. I encourage my colleagues to support this amendment. I yield back.
Thank you. And the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 2, amendment to H.R. 35.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I'd like to make some brief comments about the amendment. First, this is an authorization bill, not an appropriations bill. So it's our job to provide long-term guidance to the annual appropriations process for areas under our jurisdiction. It's the Appropriations Committee's job to balance this and other committees' guidance on an annual basis within an overall spending limit. This amendment, I believe, would undercut the value of this committee's role in providing that guidance. Additionally, I find this amendment too restrictive. While I would expect that most, if not all, of the activities in this bill would actually be carried out by the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, I don't see a reason to legislate a rigid restriction. For example, this bill authorizes storage and grid integration R&D activities, some of which may better actually be handled by the Office of Electricity or even ARPA-E. So I don't believe that we should prevent the Secretary from doing that. We also believe that stating that no additional funds are authorized would be contradictory to parts of the bill that authorize additional funds for solar activity. R&D, for example, we have a modest 5% increase starting with a level in 2020 that the House just passed a few weeks ago. So all those things considered, plus the need to take on climate change and more aggressively pursue research in this area, I will be opposing the amendment. Is there any further discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman?
I recognize the ranking member.
Thank you. If Mr. Norman's amendment will help us all be 45 in the time he described, I think we should all vote for it. With that, I yield back.
And I do wonder how long it would take just to count the $1.5 trillion that was added at the end of 2017 to that same national debt. I wonder if we had only counted that long before taking that vote. Okay, so. Okay. Any further discussion on the amendment?
Yep, Mr. Chair. Here, stage left.
What do we got? Mr. Foster.
Yeah, no, I just moved to strike the last word. I'd just like to point out in this discussion that the household net worth, the net worth of American families is $107 trillion. And so there is enough money to pay off our national debt. We simply have chosen not to do that, is point one. The other point is that household net worth is up by over $50 trillion since the start of the Obama recovery. So that, again, there is enough money that has been generated recently by our economy to have, had we decided to pay off the national debt, we could have done so. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. With that, we will move to vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any more amendments? All right. A reporting quorum being present, I move that the Energy Subcommittee report H.R. 3597 to the full Committee on Science, Space, and Technology with the recommendation that the bill be approved. Those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed say no.
No.
The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported.
Mr. Chairman,
Recognize the ranking member.
I request recorded vote.
Further proceeding on this amendment will be postponed. We will now consider H.R. 3607, the Fossil Energy Research and Development Act of 2019. Clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 3607, a bill to amend the Energy Policy Act of 2005.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open to amendment at any point. I recognize myself to briefly comment on the bill. H.R. 3607, the Fossil Energy Research and Development Act 2019, provides critical guidance to ensure that our fossil energy resources are developed and used in an environmentally responsible way. This bipartisan bill, which I'm proud to co-sponsor, was introduced by my colleague, Mr. Vesey, and also is co-sponsored by Mr. Schweikert, Chairwoman Fletcher, and Chairwoman Johnson. The legislation is also endorsed by the Carbon Utilization Research Council, the Carbon Capture Coalition, the Natural Resources Defense Council, the Environmental Defense Fund, ClearPath, and Carbon 180. Does anyone else wish to be recognized? We will now proceed with the amendments in the order of the roster. The first amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the chair, and the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 1, amendment to H.R. 3607, offered by Mr. Lamb.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize myself to briefly explain this amendment. This amendment makes technical and conforming changes made in consultation with the Department of Energy, expert stakeholders, and our minority committee staff. Is there any further discussion on this amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Chairman Lamb. This amendment makes technical changes to H.R. 3607, the Fossil Energy Research and Development Act of 2019, in order to correct a critical funding error which was identified by staff this week. And I want to take the opportunity to thank the staff and to extend my gratitude to the chairman for working with us to make those important changes. And I want to encourage all of my colleagues to support this amendment. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. We will move to vote on the amendment. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois. He is recognized to offer an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 2, amendment to H.R. 3607,
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. And I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment directs the Secretary of Energy to administer a prize challenge competition as an innovative way to spur the development of technologies to decrease greenhouse gas emissions associated with fossil fuel energy production. Federal prize challenges create low-cost to taxpayer incentives that have unleashed American ingenuity, helping solve significant problems. The Department of Energy has administered a variety of successful prize challenges in the past. In 2007, I was able to get the H-Prize Act passed to spur the development of hydrogen as a clean transportation fuel. One H-Prize challenge led to a quantum leap in hydrogen fuel cell car refueling technology and paved the way for widespread adoption of cleaner transportation vehicles. DOE's L-Prize revolutionized LED light bulb technology and resulted in low-cost, high-quality bulbs that are ubiquitous today. The Wave Energy Prize issued a challenge asking teams to double the performance of then state-of-the-art wave energy converters. 4 teams surpassed that goal. Lynn Orr, then DOE's Undersecretary for Science and Energy, indicated that the technology leap incentivized by the Energy Department demonstrates how rapid innovation can be achieved in a public prize challenge. In recognition of the demonstrated success of prize challenges to incentivize private sector development, a bipartisan group of colleagues joined me in introducing H.R. 3100, the Challenges and Prizes for Climate Act of 2019. Provisions of that legislation have been incorporated into this amendment, with a focus on innovations to mitigate emissions related to fossil energy production. The underlying legislation already includes a prize challenge provision for carbon capture from the air or water, but not directly from fossil energy production sources. My amendment authorizes a prize challenge for capture directly from the source, as well as prize competition for technologies that demonstrate beneficial uses of recovered CO2. These are 2 challenges I think that we can all agree would be very helpful to put out there. I've been just very much have been in favor of prize challenges. I know it's been a really bipartisan issue to offer prize challenges. As I said, it's a low-cost to taxpayer way of putting out these challenges there that really incentivize Americans to use their ingenuity to come up with really new ways of attacking and solving problems. So I want to thank the committee considering this amendment. I encourage my colleagues to support the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Vote will occur on the amendment. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no. No. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is offered by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cloud, who is recognized to offer the amendment.
Mr. Chair, withdraw my amendment.
Does the gentleman wish to be recognized?
No, you can just withdraw it.
Okay. The amendment is withdrawn. Are there any more amendments on this bill? A reporting quorum being present, I move that the Energy Subcommittee of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee report H.R. 3607 to the full committee with the recommendation that the bill be approved. Those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. By saying aye? Aye. Aye. Those opposed, no? No. The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported.
Mr. Chairman,
Ranking Member?
I request a recorded vote.
Okay, further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. We will now consider H.R. 3609, the Wind Energy Research and Development Act of 2019. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 3609, a bill.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open to amendment at any point. I recognize myself briefly to comment on the bill. H.R. 3609, the Wind Energy Research and Development Act of 2019, reauthorizes the Department of Energy's Wind Energy Technology Office and provides updated direction to the department's research efforts to ensure that we are advancing the next generation of wind energy technologies. The bipartisan bill is sponsored by my colleague, Mr. Tonko of New York, and co-sponsored by Mr. Bacon of Nebraska, Mr. Kennedy of Massachusetts, and Mr. Fortenberry of Nebraska. The legislation is endorsed by the American Wind Energy Association and the Distributed Wind Energy Association, which collectively represent around 1,000 wind companies nationwide, as well as the Natural Resources Defense Council and the Environmental Defense Fund. Does anyone else wish to be recognized? We will now proceed with the amendments in the order of the roster. The first amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the chair, and the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 1, amendment to H.R. 3609, offered by Mr. Lamb.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize myself briefly to explain the amendment. This amendment makes technical and conforming changes made in consultation with the Department of Energy, expert stakeholders, and our minority committee staff. Is there any further discussion on this amendment? Vote will occur on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentlelady from Michigan. She is recognized to offer an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 2, amendment to H.R. 3609, offered by Ms. Stevens.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentlelady for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your expedient leadership in today's markup. Not long ago, we sat in this very hearing room and heard from experts in renewable energy about the need for more research and resources to advance solar and wind technologies. As we heard, the federal government has a critical role to play in catalyzing the development and commercialization of these technologies. Today, I'd like to challenge my colleagues to look further into innovative renewable energy technologies. My amendment would direct the Department of Energy to report on its research, development, and demonstration needs to further examine and validate the technical and economic viability of airborne wind energy systems. Global scientific research has proven that there is enough power in wind energy to be a primary source of near zero emission electrical power as the global economy continues to grow throughout the 21st century. Federal investment in wind energy technologies is critical for many states, including my home state of Michigan. The Department of Energy's Office of Wind Energy Technologies has granted nearly $12 million to projects in my state alone. While wind energy is traditionally derived from turbines on the Earth's surface, higher altitude winds have been found to be steadier and faster than those found on the surface. Airborne wind turbines have the potential to generate over 4 times the power of traditional surface turbines. Successful, wide-scale use of this technology would exponentially help our global efforts to combat the negative effects of climate change. The Department of Energy has already started to invest in research in airborne wind technologies. A company called Menaki received $5 million from ARPA-E in 2010 to develop an airborne wind turbine that would enable widespread use of wind power to reduce CO2 emissions, reduce the power of clean energy for consumers, and increase the security of the U.S. power grid by diversifying our energy resources. Soon after its success with ARPA-E, Google's parent company, Alphabet, acquired Menaki and began improving the technology for transition to a commercial product. This company is the only company in the United States that is working toward utility-scale wind farms with multiple units. I think it's worth looking into whether U.S. innovators should be taking more shots on a goal in this emerging sector. H.R. 3609, the Wind Energy Research and Development Act of 2019, is an important step in prioritizing research, development, testing, and evaluation of wind energy technologies. My amendment would strengthen its goal of increasing the use of wind energy in the United States by determining where taxpayer dollars can be the most effective as we invest in improving the economic and technical viability of this technology. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Vote will occur on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas, and he is recognized to offer an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 3, amendment to H.R. 3609, offered by Mr. Weber.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading without objection, so ordered, and I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Chairman Lamb. My amendment to H.R. 3609, the Wind Energy Research and Development Act of 2019, adds a requirement that no additional funds are authorized to carry out this legislation. Instead, it directs the Department of Energy to fund the work authorized under this legislation using amounts already appropriated to its Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, or EERE, without increasing overall spending. As I mentioned in my opening statement, EERE is funded at almost $2.4 billion with a B dollars, a budget that dwarfs those of the other applied research programs at the department. Today, DOE's wind energy research receives $92 million in annual funding through this office. While there are significant opportunities for new and exciting research in areas like material science and computing that can improve wind energy technologies, it is our job in Congress to focus federal agencies on the best use of finite federal funding. That's a lot of alliteration. Put simply, we can't increase overall spending every time we establish priorities for federal research programs, and we have to focus our resources on work that industry cannot support. Now, I think a case can be made for supporting aspects of the research programs authorized in this legislation. But it's very clear that DOE already receives ample funding to maintain its solar energy technology programs and meet the mission goals of the department without another top-line spending increase. As I said in my opening statement, I'd like to again encourage the majority to work with us to prioritize the fundamental research we all support. But we have to stop pretending DOE can get a 30 to 40% increase for every single program. I believe this is a common sense proposal, and I encourage my colleagues to support this amendment. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I'd like to make some brief comments about the amendment, which will mostly echo the comments I made about the amendment to the solar bill. This is an authorization bill, not an appropriations bill. So the amendment in question, I believe, would deprive this committee of its job of providing long-term guidance to the appropriators. I also just think the amendment is too restricted. Again, I think that most, if not all, of the activities will probably be carried out by EERE, but there's no good reason for us to restrict the Secretary's ability to do that. I think that the experts at DOE can decide how best to carry out the aim of this bill. We are authorizing additional funds for energy R&D activities rather than what the amendment calls for, which is to restrict additional funds. So I just think those goals are at odds with each other. For those reasons, I oppose the amendment. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. The noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. Are there any other amendments? If not, a reporting quorum being present, I move that the Energy Subcommittee of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology report H.R. 3609 as amended to the full committee with the recommendation that the bill be approved. Those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed, say no.
No.
The ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I request recorded vote.
Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. We will now recess for 10 minutes. All right, the hearing will come to order. The question is on the motion to favorably report H.R. 3597, and the clerk will call the roll.
Chairman Lamb?
Aye.
Chairman Lamb, aye. Mr. Lipinski?
Aye.
Mr. Lipinski, aye. Ms. Fletcher?
Aye.
Ms. Fletcher, aye. Ms. Stevens? Ms. Stevens, aye. Ms. Horn? Mr. McNerney? Mr. Foster? Aye. Mr. Foster, aye. Mr. Caston?
Aye.
Mr. Caston, aye. Ms. Johnson?
Aye.
Ms. Johnson, aye. Mr. Weber?
No.
Mr. Weber, no. Mr. Biggs? No. Mr. Biggs, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Cloud? Mr. Cloud, no. Mr. Lucas? No. Mr. Lucas, no.
Are there any members who haven't voted or would like to change their vote? The clerk will report.
Chairman Lamb, the ayes are 7 and the noes are 5.
The bill is favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make any necessary technical and conforming changes to the bill. Without objection, so ordered. Members will have 2 subsequent calendar days in which to submit supplemental, minority, or additional views on the measure. The question is on the motion to favorably report H.R. 3607, and the clerk will call the roll.
Chairman Lamb?
Aye.
Chairman Lamb, aye. Mr. Lipinski?
Aye.
Mr. Lipinski, aye. Ms. Fletcher?
Aye.
Ms. Fletcher, aye. Ms. Stevens? Ms. Stevens, aye. Ms. Horn? Mr. McNerney? Mr. Foster? Mr. Foster, aye. Mr. Caston?
Aye.
Mr. Caston, aye. Ms. Johnson?
Aye.
Ms. Johnson, aye. Mr. Weber?
No.
Mr. Weber, no. Mr. Biggs? No. Mr. Biggs, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Cloud? No. Mr. Cloud, no. Mr. Lucas? No. Mr. Lucas, no.
Are there any members who haven't voted or would like to change their vote? The clerk will report.
Chairman Lamb, the ayes are 7 and the noes are 5.
The bill is favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make any necessary technical and conforming changes to the bill. Without objection, so ordered. Members will have 2 subsequent calendar days in which to submit supplemental, minority, or additional views on the measure. The question is now on the motion to favorably report H.R. 3609, and the clerk will call the roll.
Chairman Lamb?
Aye.
Chairman Lamb, aye. Mr. Lipinski?
Aye.
Mr. Lipinski, aye. Ms. Fletcher?
Aye.
Ms. Fletcher, aye. Ms. Stevens? Ms. Stevens, aye. Ms. Horn? Mr. McNerney? Mr. Foster? Mr. Foster, aye. Mr. Caston? Mr. Caston, aye. Ms. Johnson?
Aye.
Ms. Johnson, aye. Mr. Weber?
No.
Mr. Weber, no. Mr. Biggs? No. Mr. Biggs, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Cloud? No. Mr. Cloud, no. Mr. Lucas? No. Mr. Lucas, no.
Are there any members who haven't voted or would like to change their vote? The clerk will report.
Chairman Lamb, the ayes are 7 and the noes are 5.
The bill is favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. I ask unanimous consent that staff be authorized to make any necessary technical and conforming changes to the bill. Without objection, so ordered. Members will have 2 subsequent calendar days in which to submit supplemental, minority, or additional views on the measure. I want to thank the members for their attendance today, and this concludes our subcommittee markup.